This morning we begin a reading, semi-continuous reading through the letter to the Philippians. And so over the next few weeks we'll be hearing from Paul as he writes from prison there. What I find myself thinking about is Jim. A year before that Sunday, Jim had had surgery for cancer in his abdomen. They told him they got it all. They told him no need for chemotherapy or radiation, no need for follow-up. They told him everything was good. But on this Sunday, a year later, Jim was coming out of worship and facing surgery in a couple of days. In fact, that first surgeon had abandoned him, had quit answering phone calls and inquiries. There's much more to that story, but it really doesn't matter today. In our hearing of Paul, we hear that Paul is writing to a congregation in Philippi, and in some ways, maybe like many of those earliest congregations that Paul had founded, they were working out how to be congregation together, and there was some concern about how to be one together, how to be a unified whole. But much of the bigger question was a question of how to be community that is faithful in the midst of a culture that is not particularly responsive to that. The conflict that the people of that congregation in Philippi is having is about the messiness of relationships with those who are of a culture that sees things quite differently. And so what matters today is a question of how we persist in faith even in the times, and especially in the times when it is difficult. For Paul's audience, it was all about living in a time that didn't accept that witness to or of Jesus Christ. And frankly, it would have been just much easier to give it up. Just go about your business. Join the way the culture was doing what it was doing. Ignore that witness. And in fact, at the very same time, Paul is writing from prison. He tells us as much as in his letter. Now, we can't be quite clear which imprisonment it was. There are people who argue for all kinds of things. But what we do know is that he was in a setting where it would have been very easy for him to just say, look, what's the use? Why not just give up? And yet, in the midst of that, he manages to write this letter that calls those people to persist in faith, even as he is facing the very real threat that he could be killed at the hands of those who are holding him. In the midst of that, he writes this letter that is a call to encouragement and faithfulness in the face of the very difficult challenges of the day. Now, Paul starts off, and this is going to be the David Frerichs paraphrase. The part that we hear, Paul starts out by saying, gee, I could just die, and that would be pretty good because then I'd be with Jesus Christ. But then again, if I live, if I stick around, then I'm here to share this faith and to share everything that I have with you and to encourage you. Either way, I win. But the better part is for me to hold on so that I can encourage you, so that I can walk with you, so that I can share my faith with you. And in fact, I hold on to the hope that I'll be able to come and be with you again. Jumping back to Jim. Jim was facing pretty daunting odds of his own. It was the kind of situation where it would have been easy for him to just give up. It was the kind of situation where the emotional load of the previous year and the physical drain of that cancer retaking and reclaiming parts of his body, it would have been easy to let go and quit trusting the story of God's faithfulness. It would have been easy to just begin to believe that somehow it wasn't true, that God had become enfleshed in Jesus Christ to walk with us, to teach us, to bring new life and healing to us. Indeed, Jesus died and rose again for us. Yes, it could have been one of those times when Jim could have just ignored all that witness that had been handed down through the years. It sure seemed like the prayers weren't answered. And so on this Sunday morning, facing that surgery, Jim came out of worship and looked his pastor in the eye and he said, "You know, I figure however this turns out, I win. If I die, I get to be with Christ. And if I live, I get to spend more time with my beautiful family." And indeed, that is not quite Paul's saying, "My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better, but to remain in the flesh is more necessary." But Jim's statement is a statement of one trusting in the absolute truth of God's love and presence no matter what. But that isn't the end of the story. For Paul, once he has defined that, he goes on to say, "Look, I am going to come back and I intend to come be with you. And whether I get to be with you or I don't get to be with you, please live your faith, live your life. Indeed, live your citizenship in the reign of God, in the kingdom of heaven. Live that in such a way that I can be proud of you. Live it in such a way that I will recognize that you are living as a community that is one in spirit. Trust together that however things work out, and as much as you are seeking to persist in your faithfulness against all of these odds, trust that in the end, God is present with you. And God is working your salvation. And it's not about so much what you do, but it's about what God is doing. And in the end, then your faith is a privilege. It is a privilege in that even though you may struggle, and indeed it's probable that you will, when you struggle, you are in a long line of people who struggle, like Paul, like all those early witnesses to the faith, like generations upon generations of people who have lived in the face of daunting odds. And yet, when you live into this reality of faithfulness, you can trust that no matter how it works out, you win. For in the end, you are privileged to witness by your living to the amazing grace, the amazing love, the amazing mercy, the amazing truth of God's love for you.